Tyson Fury has a way of throwing his uppercut that is, at least on paper, technically a flaw, fundamentally speaking, if we're consulting the basic biomechanics of how to throw strikes that we learned on day one. But in his case, in the case of other professionals, they are able to break the rules like artists because they've learned them like professionals in a way that allows them to get away with things that would otherwise be a mistake. Now, how they go about learning this and making sure it works for them is a two-part process. And we're going to use him, Tyson Fury's uppercut, contrasted to me because our body types couldn't possibly be more different and our styles are also more different, so that you can figure out how to come up with a checklist in your own training to be more intentioned with your learning and find out if you're making mistakes that are actually mistakes or if you're utilizing something that could become a good attribute for your style. So, Tyson Fury, he throws what's called an arm punch, right? He's not using dynamic rotational movement of his hips, of his torso, his abdominals, and his legs, which we're taught to throw strikes that way because it confers maximum power, especially for short-limbed fighters like myself. He has exceptionally long arms. A longer arm equals a longer lever. Ancient man came up with an invention, an innovation, called an atlatl. This was a hook that they attached to a spear that allowed them to throw it longer and further, essentially giving them a longer arm. They probably figured this out, we don't know this for sure, but they probably figured this out by looking at the hunters who had the furthest throwing ability and realizing that that was correlated with a longer arm. It's a basic physiological principle. Now, number one, which we've just talked about, is anthropometry. The differences in your own body compared to someone else. Think of things like limb lengths, proportions of your shoulders, head size, that kind of thing. So in his case, he's got that going for him. We have to satisfy this criteria first, because if we cannot physically get away with something, there's no use in trying to come out with a reason why we could employ it stylistically or tactically, because we can't do it, right? We're already stop-lined. Stop-lined is not a word, you get the idea. So, in my case, because I have short arms, I'm 5'10", I'm 230 pounds, and my reach is 5'9". I'm going to be much more like Mike Tyson in how I throw strikes, right? I'm going to use a lot of torso mobility and use my abdominals, my legs, all of that. So, number one, I'm different from him. I can't really throw it like that. Because also just the way that my guard is held, if I'm like here, how do I rotate? The only way I could do it is by modifying it, by coming down and throwing it, which I might be able to do because I have quite good rotational mobility in my shoulders. So if I was looking to how to employ this myself, that's how I would do it. I would go about making it different and accurate for me. So that's number one. Number two is the actual style, the tactical considerations, the strategical considerations of utilizing this move, right? Because if you look at it, he's telegraphing the hell out of it, right? How could this ever hit somebody? Well, he mixes it in with jabs that he keeps very long. And because he's so awkward and herky-jerky and does all this weird shit, he's hard to figure out. So even though he's moving his arm like this, all of a sudden you might be hooked from across the room, right? He's just a fucking weirdo, and he makes it work. You're probably not like that. I'm not like that. My style is much more defensive. I like to counterpunch. He does some of that, but he's much different. And a lot of that is informed by his anthropometry, his body structure. Our style is a combination of two main things. Number one is our body structure, our own proportions, our own unique attributes, like if we're fast but not powerful, for example, and our influences. But what people often do, they make the mistake of, is they start doing a mistake, like say someone who wants to do the Philly shell, but they'll drop their shoulder all the way here, like Eddie Hall, who did that when he boxed Thor. He did this weird thing that people were calling the Philly crab, and it was so stupid. But he didn't have people that would tell him not to do that. He had yes men around him, and although he was very powerful and athletic, it didn't work for him. But he justified it as, this is a style of mine, so I have to keep employing this style. Like the mistake justifies keeping up with the mistake because he's ingrained it into his brain, rather than learning it how to employ a proper Philly shell and then coming up with nuances as he goes along, finding out if they work or not, right? The second way that we should be looking for things that may or may not work, right? Number one being, what mistakes are we already making that are technically mistakes that we might want to see if they work or not? in Eddie Hall's case, doing this, which did not work. Number 2 would be, let's look at fighters that have similar structures to ourselves or similar attributes, like if we're fast and not strong, for example, and see what they've gotten away with and see if we can employ it. Those are the 2 reservoirs for where we come up with our stylistic nuances, right? Those are the places, the main places. So, keeping that in mind, if I want to come up with something unique, I have to have a checklist, right? And what it should be is maybe 3 points. Number 1 is when. When are we going to actually use this in a fight? What are we actually looking for? What are the conditions in our opponent, in a specific fight? What type of opponent that we need to satisfy for this to make sense? So we have to come up with a thesis. This way, it's much more intentioned, and we do away with things that automatically make no sense. Because if we think about something and immediately we say, oh, that wouldn't work, we discard it, right? We don't even need to test it out. Let's not waste time. Number 2, what would be the strategy that they would use against us? Like, what are we leaving ourselves open to, right? So if, for example, I'm doing this weird bolo uppercut that crosses a lot of distance that Tyson Fury throws, one thing that he realized is he has to mix in the jab or else he's going to get smoked. And he also does something weird that would be kind of, I don't know if you'd call it an error, but it's certainly unorthodox, which is that he cross blocks when he throws it sometimes because that's where he's open. So he's already considered that second point. What am I opening myself up to? Number 3, if you want to go one step further, would be, what do I do once I know what they're going to do in order to beat me, right? So we kind of just answered that question, right? It's that he's going to be open to punches on this side, and he's telegraphing it, so he's going to mix it up with the jab, and of course he's going to cross block or go offline when he throws it in order to satisfy that criteria. So those are the 3, right? You could make 50. I've made ebooks that have much longer, and you plug them in and program them, and they rank order all the different moves that you should try by virtue of which ones seem better technically or theoretically. But that costs money, and I'm not finished it yet. This is 3 that you can employ immediately, and it makes sense. It makes your learning intentioned, because if you just go into a sparring session just thinking, I'm just going to practice, you don't have anything in mind that you're trying out, sure, you're getting some practice, but you're not learning optimally. You're not testing things out that you can actually utilize. You always want to be working on something, right? It just doesn't make sense to be lackadaisical or not examine life as you go through it. You are a student, but you're also a teacher, and you have access to your own brain, so you can teach yourself 24 hours of the day if you know how to do so. So please, become your own teacher, learn how to teach yourself, and then you can start doing things like this, and you'll become somebody who can break the rules like an artist because you've learned them like a professional.